Eudaimanya, systems and frameworks to improve habits, mind, and life.
Welcome to Eudaimanya. Influence.
Oh.
So picture this. You just signed a gym contract that you have been actively avoiding for 6 solid months.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Or, you're browsing online and you buy this incredibly expensive professional-grade blender that you absolutely do not need simply because a little flashing red tag said only 2 units left.
And you panic by it.
Exactly. But later, you sit back, you look at your receipt, and you ask yourself, how did I say yes to that?
Yeah.
You didn't actually think about it. I mean, you didn't sit down and weigh the pros and cons on a legal pad.
No, of course not.
The reality is someone just pushed the exact right button in your brain.
And that gets right to the heart of the matter, really, because we all operate under this universally shared false belief. We construct this comforting narrative for ourselves that our decisions are the result of conscious, rational, step-by-step evaluation.
Yeah, that we're in control.
Right. But the rupture, the uncomfortable truth presented in the book we're analyzing today by Robert Cialdini is that in reality, we often decide purely by reflex.
Yeah, and according to the book, it's framed fundamentally as a survival mechanism, like it's a completely necessary adaptation for modern decision overload.
We just have too much coming at us.
Exactly. If we stop to deeply analyze every single choice in our fast-paced lives, we'd just be, frozen in analysis paralysis. So the brain uses mental shortcuts. But to really grasp how mechanical this is, let me share my absolute favorite analogy from the book.
Oh, is this the turkey one?
It is the turkey experiment. It's so good. So a mother turkey is a fiercely protective animal, right? She will viciously attack a polecat, which is her natural enemy.
Just on site.
On site. So to test this, researchers took a stuffed polecat and pulled it toward the mother turkey on a string. And as expected, she went crazy. She attacked it. But then, and this is wild, the researchers put a small tape recorder inside the stuffed polecat.
Just playing a sound, right?
Yeah, it's playing the cheep-cheep sound of the baby turkey. And suddenly, not only does the mother turkey stop attacking her mortal enemy, she actually gathers the stuffed polecat underneath her to nurture it.
It's just entirely mechanical. I mean, that cheep-cheep sound is the symbol trigger that completely overrides her visual reality. It just activates her maternal programming.
Click where the trigger gets pulled and the behavioral tape plays. And the terrifying part is, human beings have our own exact versions of those tapes. So the mission of this deep dive is to map what the author calls the automatic influence system. We are going to understand the specific triggers that professionals use to activate your automatic yes without you ever even realizing it's happening. Okay, let's unpack this.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's incredibly helpful to look at this alongside Daniel Kahneman's work on cognitive architecture. Kahneman divides the brain into 2 systems.
System 1 and System 2.
Exactly. System 2 is the slow, deliberate, rational thinker. But System 1 is the fast, automatic, intuitive reactor. So if Kahneman wrote the architectural blueprint explaining that System 1 exists, Cialdini wrote the malicious exploitation manual on how to hack it.
That is a great way to put it.
And what the book makes abundantly clear is that this automatic influence system thrives under very specific environmental conditions. It actually requires things like fatigue, stress, distraction, and uncertainty.
Oh, so when you're tired.
Right. When your conscious brain is tired, your defenses are down, and System 1 basically just takes the wheel.
But hold on, let me make sure I'm giving internal logic here. When you say they hack it, how exactly are they bypassing System 2? Because, if someone comes at me with a really high-pressure sales pitch, my guard immediately goes up. I know they're trying to manipulate me.
Well, that's because the most effective influencers don't use high-pressure tactics. The book relies on a concept called social jujitsu.
Okay, jujitsu.
Yeah, think about physical jujitsu. A smaller fighter doesn't try to bludgeon a larger opponent with raw force. Instead, they use the opponent's own gravity and momentum against them.
Ah, I see. So an influencer isn't using a heavy-handed logical argument to force you into submission.
They don't have to.
They just activate a psychological rule you already carry inside you. It's like how social media algorithms work. They don't force you to scroll. They just figure out what you're already naturally curious about and put it right in front of your thumb.
That's a perfect comparison.
And because the rule is already native to your brain, you perceive the resulting decision as your own entirely independent choice. That's what makes the manipulation virtually undetectable.
Exactly. You provide the momentum, and they just provide the trigger.
So let's look at the first way they use our momentum against us, which is based on probably the oldest social rule we have. Like, why does an unasked for gift completely obligate you?
Reciprocity.
Right. This brings us to the first trigger, reciprocation. The mechanism here is that human societies survive through sharing, so we are hardwired to repay what we receive.
It's foundational to civilization.
It is. And the book illustrates this beautifully with a university professor who just randomly sent out Christmas cards to a massive list of complete strangers.
Just out of nowhere.
Yeah, he expected maybe a few confused replies at best. Instead, he received an absolute flood of holiday cards back from people who had no idea who he was.
Just reacting to the rule.
Click were. They received a card, so they sent a card.
The societal rule demands that we don't take without giving. But the vulnerability, the really dangerous part, lies in the fact that the rule applies even if you never requested the initial favor.
Right, and that leads to this incredibly sneaky tactic the book calls rejection-then-retreat. Cialdini tells the story of a Boy Scout who walks up and asks you to buy a ticket to a Saturday night circus for $5.
And you say no, obviously.
You say no. Then the Boy Scout retreats and says, well, if you don't want a ticket, how about a $1 chocolate bar? And the target ends up buying 2 chocolate bars, even though they don't even like chocolate.
The underlying mechanism there is a reciprocal concession. I mean, the Boy Scout made a concession by backing down from the $5 ticket to the $1 chocolate.
So you feel like you have to, too.
Yes, your psychological programming dictates that you must answer his concession with a concession of your own. So you move from no to yes.
And the consequence is you buy chocolate you don't even want. You trade your hard-earned money for candy you despise just because the retreat feels like a favor you are deeply obligated to repay.
It's incredibly effective.
It completely reminds me of modern B2B software sales. A vendor asks you to sign a massive, expensive enterprise contract. You say, absolutely not, that's way over budget. So they retreat, right, and offer you a stripped-down basic tier for a fraction of the price.
And you sign it immediately.
You sign it feeling like you won the negotiation. But in reality, the basic tier was all they ever wanted to sell you in the first place.
That's a perfect modern equivalent. However, we do have to tension this from the outside because there are strict limits to this trigger. Reciprocity relies entirely on the assumption of a genuine social debt.
Okay, meaning what?
Meaning, the moment the target identifies the gift not as a kind gesture, but as a calculated commercial artifice like a faked trigger designed just to extort a purchase, the entire psychological obligation evaporates. The rule says we must meet favors with favors. It does not say we must meet tricks with favors.
So intention really matters there. Okay, so if the momentum of reciprocity comes from an external social debt, what happens when the pressure is entirely internal?
That's the next one.
Yeah, this introduces the trigger of commitment and consistency. The mechanism here is pretty simple. Once you take a stand on something, you face an immense, almost suffocating internal pressure to align your future behavior with that initial stance.
We hate feeling like hypocrites.
Exactly. And the book shares a wild experiment involving staged thefts on a New York beach. So an accomplice would put a radio on a blanket next to a random person, leave for a walk, and then a researcher, pretending to be a thief, would run up and steal the radio.
And under normal conditions.
Under normal conditions, out of 20 people, only 4 intervened.
Which makes sense. It's the classic reluctance to get involved in a stranger's problem. You don't want to risk getting hurt over someone else's radio.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When they ran the experiment again with one tiny change, the results completely flipped. Before leaving the blanket, the accomplice simply asked the neighbor, "Would you please watch my things?"
And everyone said yes, of course.
Everyone said yes. So when the fake thief came by this time, 19 out of 20 people transformed into aggressive vigilantes. Like, they chased the thief, they tackled him, they snatched the radio back.
Because that simple verbal commitment forced them to act consistently with their promise. Inconsistency is generally viewed as a really negative personality trait. I mean, we call people flaky or two-faced or unstable.
Nobody wants to be that person.
Exactly. So to avoid that label, we build what the book calls a foolish fortress against reason.
A foolish fortress. I love that.
Yeah.
I see this constantly with subscription services. You sign up for some software or a meal kit delivery, and you spend an hour setting up your profile and your preferences.
You're committed.
Right. And 3 months later, the service is terrible, the food is bad, but you keep paying for it because canceling feels like admitting you made a mistake in the first place.
Exactly. The consequence of this drive is that people will rationalize and defend objectively bad choices just to appear consistent to themselves. You endure the bad purchase just because you already committed to it.
Okay, so that's individual internal pressure.
Right.
But what happens when we zoom out and look at group dynamics? Because this brings us to the trigger of social proof.
Which is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, the mechanism basically dictates that we assume an action is correct if we see other people doing it.
Which brings us to the tragic case of Kitty Genovese in New York City, as detailed in the book. She was attacked outside her apartment building for over half an hour. 38 separate neighbors heard her screams, looked out their windows, and yet not a single person called the police.
But wait, let me push back on this for a second. Looking at what others are doing actually makes logical sense most of the time, doesn't it? Like if I'm sitting in a movie theater and suddenly everyone jumps up and sprints for the exit, I shouldn't just sit there analyzing the situation. I should run too.
You absolutely should.
That's a highly functional survival trait. So why is Cialdini framing this as a flaw?
Because in the movie theater example, the danger is clear and the required action is obvious. Social proof becomes a fatal flaw specifically under conditions of ambiguity. The media at the time blamed modern urban apathy for the Kitty Genovese tragedy. They claimed society had just become cold and heartless. But Cialdini argues something much more complex and mechanical was at play.
Ah, right. The consequence of social proof in a crisis is what he calls pluralistic ignorance.
That's the one.
Imagine you hear a scream, you look out your window, and you see other neighbors looking out their windows. But because everyone is trying to appear calm and collected while they assess the situation, you look at their blank faces and think, well, they don't seem panicked.
It must not be a big deal.
Right, it must just be a lover's quarrel. It's not an emergency. Everyone is looking to everyone else for a behavioral cue, seeing them do nothing, and collectively concluding that nothing should be done.
Precisely. And this exposes the major vulnerability of social proof. We rely on the assumption of safety in numbers, but in ambiguous situations, that assumption collapses. The crowd isn't acting on superior information. The crowd is just blindly copying the crowd. And this is vital. The book offers a very specific countermeasure to break this paralysis.
Yes, I remember this. If you are ever hurt in a crowd, do not just yell help. You have to point directly at one specific individual and say, you in the blue jacket, call the police.
Which changes everything.
It does. By doing that, you instantly remove the ambiguity and you assign solitary responsibility. You bypass the paralyzing effect of social proof entirely because that person can no longer look to the crowd for cues.
It forces them out of System 1 reaction and straight into System 2 action.
Okay, so social proof is how we defer to the crowd. But what happens when there is no crowd? And instead, we defer to a single person. This is the trigger of authority.
Yeah.
The mechanism here is our deeply socialized deference to figures of power. We are taught from birth that obedience is good and rebellion is bad.
And Cialdini points to Stanley Milgram for this.
Yeah, the book highlights Milgram's infamous shock experiments, where completely ordinary, decent people were instructed to administer what they believed were near-lethal electric shocks to another person.
Just everyday people.
Everyday people. They sweated, they cried, they begged to stop, but simply because a man in a gray lab coat calmly said, the experiment requires that you continue, 2/3 of them pulled the maximum voltage lever.
It demonstrates that blind obedience supersedes logic and even deep moral convictions. We stop analyzing the merit of the command and merely react to the status of the commander.
But surely that only happens in a lab setting where people are confused, right?
Yeah.
I mean, highly trained professionals wouldn't fall for this in the real world.
You'd like to think so. But the book proves otherwise with the story of the rectal earache.
Oh, right. This is wild. I couldn't believe this when I read it. So, a doctor prescribed eardrops for a patient suffering from an infection in their right ear.
Seems normal enough.
Sure, but on the prescription pad, the doctor abbreviated right ear as R ear. The duty nurse read the prescription, and without questioning it for a single second, she administered the eardrops straight into the patient's anus.
It sounds like a joke, but it perfectly illustrates the sheer mechanical danger of this trigger. I mean, a rectal treatment for an earache makes absolutely zero medical sense. Any nurse knows that.
Obviously.
But because the order came from the top of the hierarchy, the nurse stopped thinking and started reacting.
It's exactly like those phishing emails that companies get. An email comes in from an address vaguely looking like the CEO saying, wire $50,000 to the sender immediately. And highly educated, smart accountants just do it without picking up the phone to verify, simply because the email signature says Chief Executive Officer.
That's the exact mechanism at work. And the limit to this trigger, the external tension we really have to understand here, is that we don't actually defer to true expertise. We defer to the symbols of expertise.
The symbols, like what?
Titles, tailored uniforms, luxury cars. A con artist doesn't need a medical degree. They just need the white coat and the clipboard, and our brains will automatically grant them the authority.
That's terrifying. So we defer to authority above us and the crowd around us. But there are 3 more triggers the book explores that are just as powerful, starting with who we actually like. This is the trigger of liking.
Right, a very common one.
Yeah, we are overwhelmingly prone to say yes to people we know, people who are physically attractive, people who share our similarities, or people who give us compliments. The classic example Cialdini uses is the Tupperware party. You buy plastic containers you absolutely do not need, simply because your friend invited you and you want to support them.
The social bond of the friendship completely hijacks the logic of the financial transaction.
I see this constantly with influencer marketing today. You follow someone online because you like their personality or their aesthetic. Then they drop a promo code for some random detox tea or a skincare routine.
And you just buy it.
You buy it not because you researched the ingredients, but because you have a parasocial relationship with the person selling it. You are buying the feeling of connection.
And influencers often pair that with the next trigger, which is scarcity.
Yes, the absolute panic of last units available. Scarcity triggers a phenomenon called psychological reactance. Essentially, we hate losing our freedom of choice. So when an item becomes scarce, our brain registers that as a loss of freedom, and we suddenly want the item twice as much. It completely clouds our judgment of its actual value.
The scarcity of the item is conflated with the quality of the item.
Exactly. Think about buying concert tickets or booking a hotel online. You're looking at a room, and a massive red timer pops up on the screen saying, only 1 room left, 14 other people are looking at this right now.
It induces total panic.
Your heart starts racing. You stop looking at the price, you stop looking at the reviews, and you just slam your credit card onto the keyboard. They use the threat of scarcity to shut down your analytical brain.
And finally, there is the most primal trigger of all, unity.
Right. This is the feeling of a shared identity. When someone makes us feel like one of us, whether through family ties, nationality, religious affiliation, or even a highly specific shared hobby, we immediately drop our critical defenses.
It bypasses everything.
It's why toxic corporate cultures always insist that, oh, we are a family here. They are weaponizing the concept of unity so that when they ask you to work a 60-hour week without overtime, you don't view it as a labor violation. You view it as helping out the family. So what does this all mean?
What's fascinating here is that we can step back and look at the overarching limits of this entire automatic influence framework. According to the book, the whole system of click-word shortcuts completely collapses in the face of what Cialdini calls the controlled response.
Let me guess. That's when System 2 finally wakes up.
Exactly. The shortcuts are only activated when we are processing information in a hurried, superficial way. When an individual has both the desire and the capacity to meticulously analyze the information in front of them, the shortcuts fail.
Desire and capacity.
Right. If you care deeply about the outcome of the decision, that's the desire, and you have the time and mental energy to think it through, that's the capacity. The compliance triggers bounce right off you.
But having both the desire and the capacity at the exact same moment is surprisingly rare in the modern world. Like, I might really want to make a good financial decision on a car, but if I've been at the dealership for 6 hours and my kids are screaming, my capacity is gone.
Precisely. And that points to the ultimate flaw in the book's scope. While Cialdini perfectly diagnoses and explains the architecture of our cognitive biases, the framework does not offer a permanent mechanism for deactivating these triggers long-term.
You can't just flip a switch.
No, you can't just uninstall the software. You can't just tell your brain to stop caring about what the group is doing or to stop feeling obligated by a favor.
So we're just permanently stuck with these vulnerabilities.
We are. The defense relies almost entirely on real-time awareness. You have to catch yourself in the act of being manipulated. And as we've established, real-time awareness is highly fragile.
Yeah. It goes away instantly.
It is the very first thing to break down when a person is tired, rushed, distracted, or stressed out.
Which brings us to the practical application for you, the listener. If you can't uninstall the software, how do you survive in an environment where professionals are constantly trying to hack your brain using your own psychological momentum?
We have to catch them in the act.
Exactly. The key is learning to recognize and explicitly name the trigger in real time. When you feel that sudden, irrational urge to buy something, because of a ticking countdown clock, you have to pause and say to yourself, wait, this is scarcity.
Just naming it out loud.
Yeah. Or when you feel trapped by a vendor who just bought you an expensive lunch you didn't ask for, you say, this is reciprocity. The book argues that simply naming the mechanism acts as an emergency brake.
It interrupts the automatic effect because these triggers rely entirely on operating in the shadows, bypassing your conscious mind. By naming the trigger out loud or in your head, you force the decision out of System 1 reflex and back into System 2 rational thought.
You essentially take your hands off the autopilot and grab the steering wheel.
This raises an important question. We've spent this time dissecting the mechanical nature of human compliance. We've seen how a simple sound, a uniform, an uninvited gift, or a faked countdown timer can completely hijack our rational minds. If our brains are hardwired to play these tapes, you have to ask yourself, how many of the important decisions in your life were truly yours, and how many were simply the automatic yes that someone else knew exactly how to activate?
If this video was useful, give it a like, subscribe, and share. More systems and frameworks in the next Eudaimanya video.